here is something that you don't get to hear on any other show. And I'm confident in saying that no matter what show it is. Look, first off, for those of you who don't know, hey, I'm Pete A. Turner, executive producer and host of your Break It Down show. I was a combat spy for years, working in places like Bosnia, Iraq, Egypt. Let me just say this. I have been outside of the wire probably as much as anybody you're ever going to encounter, and probably more. A lot of time outside the wire collecting as an intelligence agent. Counterintelligence is what I did. So when we do these spy versus spy episodes, which is what this one is, we have a real treat in that you've got someone guiding the conversation that has done the job. And in this case, we've got FBI agent Bob Hamer on the show. And what's incredible about Bob and me is that in a lot of ways our work overlaps, but there's enough difference that it's really interesting for the two of us to talk. You guys get the benefit of that. So Bob is an undercover guy. So he would go and he went undercover with, get this, Nambla, the Man Boy Love Association. So, he's infiltrating these people. I'm not infiltrating, but I'm making friends, same like he is, with terrorists, the worst people in a valley or whatever it is, to try to figure out where the threat is, try to figure out how to get the area to calm down a little bit and help build stability. So we do these things in different ways with different means, but you're not going to hear this conversation anywhere else. And so Bob, among other things, is a fantastic author. And it's hilarious because he's so self-deprecating. He says he got a 0 on the FBI's personality test. He says he hates writing, but then again, he has all of these successful books. His website is bobhamer.net. And if you buy any of the books, for sure, buy them through our link if you can. If you want to buy anything from Amazon through our link, let me know and I'll send you a link. But he has written books with Oliver North. He's written a book called Homefront. He wrote Born on the 5th of July with a veteran. He has written Targets Down, which is more fiction. So he writes everything, and he's a co-author. So here's a guy who infiltrates gangs. He is a comfortable co-author. He also can write fiction on his own. He's a multi-decade long FBI agent, and you're about to hear a spy talk to a guy who's an infiltrator, and it's the same kind of thing. So if you like our Spy versus Spy episodes, you're in for a treat. And if you're new to the show, by the way, 5 episodes a week. 5 of them are going to be live. You can always watch that. And then we do 5 regular releases of the live shows. We have a few pre-recorded shows left from the old style where we did audio first, but those are largely all out. So pretty much everything else you can always get live before the podcast release. If you want to go watch on YouTube, it would be the best place. Or you can go on Facebook to breakitdownshow.com because they'll all post there automatically. You can see these shows there. Wherever you watch is great. Throw comments in there. Fantastic. That's how you support the show. One other thing, Save the Brave, savethebrave.org. Help us help veterans want to stay alive. And just a little bit of money each month helps out with that. Or, hey, come out for our golf tournament. That'll be coming up soon too. So feel free to hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. I will talk to you. I will actually interact with you. Let me know what you need. Let me know what you want help with. We build podcasts around here, the whole thing. Enough yapping. Let's get Spy versus Spy with Bob Hamer.
Lions Rock Productions.
This is Jay Moore.
This is Greg Proops.
This is Jordan Harbinger.
This is Dexter from The Offspring.
This is Nathan East.
Sebastian Younger.
This is Rick Marotta.
This is Stuart Copeland.
This is Mick Gillette.
This is Andy Summers.
Hey, this is Skunk Baxter.
This is Gabby Reese.
This is Rob Bell.
Hey, this is John Leon Guerrero.
Hey, and this is Pete A. Turner.
Hey, this is Bob Hamer, and you're listening to the Break It Down Show.
Yes. We got, I guess I'm going to call this, Bob, a Spy versus Spy episode because you and I have both gone into the wild to find things out, whether it's FBI for you or counterintelligence in the Army for me. And as a long career as an FBI agent, there's plenty to talk about. And I guess just as a disclaimer, since it's a hot topic right now, we are not going to discuss Director Comey, General Flynn, or any of that stuff. We're just not going to get current eventy at all. And we're going to really focus on the much more impossible task of staying alive when you have to go walk. And look, you and I both, one of the things we've had to do is get the enemy to trust us when it meant their life for doing that. So let's just stick right there because that's way more fascinating.
Yeah. Hey, I appreciate it. I'm not a talking head, and I'm not here to offer my opinion on what's going on in current events. So, but you know what? I've been told that I'm a narcissist. So yeah, I'll talk about me and my career.
That's fine.
I I appreciate that, Pete.
Yeah. So, okay. I understand why you get into the FBI. That's pretty obvious. It's one of those jobs as a kid, you think, man, that'd be super cool. We get to drive around in regal GNs, have guns, wear suits, look awesome, save people's lives. But the undercover piece, that's a different level of the game. How did you get into that part of it?
I'll try to make it a short story. I joined the Marine Corps right after the Marines had pulled out of Vietnam.
Okay.
And I felt guilty about, frankly, not going to Vietnam with some of my friends. And so I think I was always looking for a little bit more excitement. Now, I did spend 4 years on active duty in the Marine Corps, but didn't have the excitement or didn't really feel part of the mission that so many of the people that were active in Vietnam. So once I got into the FBI, maybe some of it was a payback, but maybe others was, I was just looking for something more exciting than traditional FBI work. Maybe I'd watched too much Rockford Files in college and law school and in the Marine Corps. So it just seemed like an interesting way to go. And my very first undercover assignment, my first undercover meeting was pretty innocuous, but I came away with this adrenaline headache and it was an adrenaline rush. And I just sought that adrenaline rush the rest of my career. I guess I was sort of like chasing the adrenaline dragon and was always looking for something that made it exciting, and being able to go face to face with bad guys and convincing them that I was one of them. For me, there was no greater excitement.
Did you get enough adrenaline in your look? Undercover work is not easy, as you know. It's hard on the psyche. It's hard on the family. It can be hard on your life. Did you act in a similar way in regular life, or were you able to kind of keep that sequestered?
No, I'm extremely boring. I mean, I don't jump out of airplanes. I don't rappel off mountains. I don't do the high dive off the diving board at the swimming pool. Yeah. I'm kind of a dull guy, but once I went undercover, once I changed into other persona, I literally became another person.
How close to that person were you, though? I mean, I know for me, when I go abroad, I try to be as genuine as I can because, like I say, hey, my name's Pete. I don't put a false name out. There's no backstoppable legend for me anyhow with what I do because there's no point. It's tactical. It's immediate. I didn't want to have to lie or be like the folks that I was dealing with, and it has to be the same for you, are so suspicious, so unwilling to surrender trust. I just started with trust and honesty. It doesn't mean I told them my address at home, but I had to be honest so that I would be believable to them.
No, you're right. It's hard enough to keep your backstory straight. So the fewer lies you tell, the better it is. I always said that the reason undercover agents get killed, it's because of the little lies, not the big lies. I mean, you may be married in real life and you're pretending that you're single, and somehow you drop a line about your wife and kids. Mm-hmm. It's that type of issues that come up. So I learned very quickly that it was to stick with as much of the truth as you could, and then you play with the big lies. But the little lies, I typically kept with whatever was semi-true in my life, so that I could remember those and not get caught slipping.
Yeah, you get one slip, and it ain't a slip. It's all the way down the mountain, and it's bad. The ability to do this, obviously the FBI trains you. How much of that stuff was helpful on a day-to-day situation, and how much is just learning it from your peers and learning it in the field?
Hey, the best instructors I had were the informants I developed and the bad guys I arrested. That's where I learned any of the skills that I had. It didn't come from any classroom. As I kind of alluded to earlier, I mean, probably Jim Rockford was my best teacher, just watching how he handled those situations. Because it all comes down to it really comes down to common sense and spontaneity, the ability to be spontaneous when they throw something at you that you weren't expecting. But I got to admit, a lot of times it wasn't. It may have come across as spontaneous, but I didn't sleep well before undercover meetings. And so I went over in my mind, I played over and over. Okay, what happens if they find my gun? What happens if they find the recorder? What's the story I'm going to tell them if they ask me this question? So that when it really did happen, I may have come off as glib, but in reality, I'd been rehearsing that conversation for weeks, months, maybe even years.
Exact same for me. It was a constant. I would walk often around the camp and I would out loud talk my potential conversations so that if a question came up, I had already thought through what the next question might be. All of the things, just you had to be so prepared, not plan A and B, but plans A through K. You had to have like your contingencies laid out so that, not that nothing was a surprise, but so mostly, and this is the ultimate goal for me, at least when I was doing it, was to be so prepared. I no longer had to prepare. I was ready to go and I wasn't worried about it. And that made me more natural with what was there. There's certain things you had to account for right away, like my gun or what this action. But once you get past that and I had accounted for everything else, it was really more about just being myself because I was prepared at that point.
Yeah. And I think probably the same thing that you experienced, I became that other person. I was no longer Bob Hamer. I was my undercover persona. So I was comfortable enough in that position that I could respond as, I had 3 different undercover names. I had identities for 3 different people. One was Robert Jason Bourne, and this was long before the movies, but I was Robert J. Bourne. I was Robert William Wallace from Braveheart, and then I was Robert David Webb, who was Jason Bourne's real character if you followed the Bourne trilogies. So when I went undercover, when I became Bob Bourne or when I became Bob Wallace, I was Bob Wallace. I was no longer Bob Hamer. And so I began to think like him and act like him and respond like him. Yeah, you're correct, but you've gone over it so much in your mind, just as you said, walking around the base camp, going over it. I ran a lot. I would run 5-10 miles and talk out loud or think out loud about, okay, this is how I'm going to respond. This is what I'm going to say. This is how we're going to try to get this investigation to go in this particular direction.
One of the things that I had to realize that just it's not, people don't think about it, they don't talk about it, but from my point of view, when I have to act very fast, it's tactical, it's immediate. I may never come back to this village. I've got to work every single day to build a strategic impact while also do a tactical thing. And so because I wouldn't necessarily meet the same person over and over again, my ability to collect in the moment what was important, but I couldn't focus on where are the bombs, where are the guns, where's the guy who's selling coke, whatever it is. I had to gently make conversation and relationships with everybody I met so that I could get entree to the worst people in the valley, because you're not just going to meet those people like they don't. Hey, Bob, they don't wear a sign around their neck that says evil guy. Like to meet evil people, you have to go out and meet other people so you can meet more and more evil people all the time.
Yeah, no, you're right. Now, our situation was a little different than what you were doing because we had targeted individuals. We knew who the target was. I knew who the subject of our investigation was, and I was getting close to that person. So for the most part, not in every undercover investigation, but in most investigations, I had an entree to that person. I had an informant that was introducing me, but there were times that we just identified a particular problem, and then I went undercover trying to get close to the people that were the target of the investigation. So it was a little different than what you did, and quite frankly, it was difficult for me, I guess, emotionally, to lie to the innocent people to get them involved in the investigation. I'll give you a perfect example. We targeted some people that were fixing thoroughbred races, horse races. And so the informant didn't want to introduce me. He was afraid of these people. One person had set up a homicide. At least that was the allegation. Another guy had been known to be pretty violent. So the informant just said, "Hey, there are the people that are doing it." Well, while I was at the track, and I was there for 6 months, there would be some innocent people, some nice people that would befriend me. And I tried to avoid them. And there was one older guy that, he just was nice to me and liked me. And I couldn't really blow him off. But when the whole case came down, now he gets tainted. Not that he was hurt, but he was shunned because they knew that, he was always hanging out with me.
Yeah.
So in those situations, I always tried to avoid involving innocent civilians in our investigation.
Yeah. I'm sort of, our jobs overlap in a lot of ways, but a lot of ways, a lot really different. Like, I know that I'm looking for Abu Malik, but I don't know where that person is, and I can't just walk into their house. So I am looking for a person, but I have to be introduced to that person. It's the only way to really get to them. And to do that, I don't, again, like, you can try to meet people, but I don't have freedom of movement either, right? I have to move with the military patrol. Now, sometimes I can go out on my own, but just very close to the camp because I can't just go wander around. It's not that kind of work. It's not undercover, it's overt. But it definitely, I had to involve innocent people, and it was super dangerous for them because they would look over their shoulder all the time, the international sign of is anybody listening, and they would say, "I can't talk to you." And so I had to figure out in my work how to overcome that so that I wasn't dangerous to them, because the last thing I need to do is get more people killed in a place that we're trying to calm down and stabilize. It was a very challenging thing because just taking our aid and putting up a fence was like, oh, they're working with the Americans. And now that person is now not only in danger, but exploitable against us.
Yeah, I understand that. And you're right. I mean, what you were doing, you were involving the innocents, and that can be dangerous for them, but it's what you needed to do to complete your mission.
Right. Yeah. Some of that stuff you learn through years and years of making mistakes. When you look back on some of the big lessons that you learned, I'm sure they weren't because you got something right. It's probably because you made an adjustment on something you'd done wrong previously. Any kind of stories about some of those lessons?
Well, I think we were fortunate that in almost every case, we got the people that we had initially targeted. Most of the time it went beyond that. I mean, there were mistakes. I can't think of a major one offhand. I mean, I shot a couple people in a drug deal. I guess.
I suppose, like, in terms of like fieldcraft, like, oh man, that's a terrible approach for me. I need to change how I do this, to make this, like, as you develop elegance in the field and you get better at it, what are some of those things you learned? We had Jay Dobbins on, and he talked about having to beat a guy up because Jay was a wide receiver at ASU working in Tucson as an undercover ATF agent. And so someone recognizes him and he's like, that's no good for me,
Yeah, no, I can understand. Jay and I are friends, and I'm familiar with his story. I never really ran across friends. Only that when I was at the racetrack, I ran across a police officer friend of mine, just when I was at the other side of the track, away from the targets of our investigation, and I just said, "Hey, I'm working." He said, "Okay." So it was something like that, but I never ran into anybody that I knew, other than I had some people walk into the lobby of a hotel while I was involved in a $500,000 heroin deal. But it couldn't, in that particular situation, we didn't want to do the deal in the lobby of the hotel, but that was the only place the bad guy would meet. And I'm literally 2,000 miles away from where these people live, and they walk in to the lobby of the hotel. I mean, if you saw this on a movie, you would never believe it, but it happened to be people that I had lived with. They had a spare room in their house. We went to the same church. I lived in there for a semester. I lived in their house, and they walked in within seconds of the bad guy telling me that if anything went wrong, I was the first person they were going to kill. And the husband and wife walked in. She saw me. I kind of shook my head like, hey, this ain't the time for grips and grins. And she realized something was wrong and ushered her husband off. And we were able to complete the deal.
Wow.
But again, I mean, it was certainly a close situation, but there was no way of really getting around that. Obviously, we tried not to do dope deals in the lobbies of hotels. We had tried to lure him up to the hotel room where we had it wired, but he didn't want to come. So, I mean, it all worked out. But for the most part, I tried to avoid public venues where I would run into people that I knew. Unlike Jay, I didn't work undercover in the town where I went to college. and I even tried to avoid, we lived in the suburbs. And so I tried to avoid even doing undercover meetings in the suburbs when I was working out of Los Angeles.
And then did you keep anybody along the way as you meet all these people in these unique situations, and you and the guy from the track, for example, like, do you ever keep someone like that in your life? You're like, I just like this guy. We're just going to continue to be friends.
No, I didn't do that. I think part of my problem is I literally scored a 0 on a CIA personality test when I was trying to get in the CIA. So it's not like I have a whole bevy of friends that I need to put in my stable of companions.
All right. So then that begs, how the hell do you get people to trust you?
Well, I think I'm a trustworthy person. I mean, I kind of come across as I'm likable, I'm personable, and it's not true for the most part. Undercover work isn't the old Miami Vice where you grab the guy by the collar and tell him, if you don't sell me the drugs, I'm going to kill you, type of thing. I mean, that doesn't work for the most part. You have to think as if there's a jury watching you, because everything you do
right
is being audio taped or videotaped. And you've got to, you have to think like a defense counsel. So, okay, this is how I'm going to shoot holes in your investigation. So you got to think like they do. And then 2, you got to think like a jury. And maybe it sounds unrealistic, but I used to pretend that my grandmother was on the jury. So look, I'm not a choir boy. I was a Marine for 4 years. I talk like a Marine when I get angry.
Right.
And sometimes you have to do that when you're undercover, but you can't come across in an undercover tape as being worse than the bad guy. You can't be dropping a bunch of F-bombs all the time, or that's going to turn the jury off. I've never seen this in all of my time in federal court. And I have a feeling that if you talk to other police officers and federal agents, they've never seen this. But I did a drug deal. We played a lot of tapes. At one point, the prosecution said, I'd like to play one more tape, Your Honor. Well, the bad guys, every other word out of their mouth was a swear word. And I mean, it was pretty colorful. And the prosecution says, Your Honor, we have one more tape to play. And the judge goes, you know what? I'm sick and tired of everybody swearing. I'm tired of the profanity. The defendants are swearing. The undercover agent is swearing. And one of the jurors, now this is in a federal trial.
Yeah.
One of the jurors pipes up and he goes, no, Your Honor, the undercover agent hasn't sworn yet. And it was like, oh my gosh, thank goodness. I mean, they were paying attention to the tapes.
Yeah.
And recognized that you know, he wasn't swearing. Now, obviously, there are times when you have to do that in order to be believable.
Yeah.
But you can't come across as worse than the bad guy.
It's funny to think that something as simple as swearing can impact the case so dramatically, but the defense is looking for any point of purchase. And if boy, that's just, I'd never even thought about that. You're right. It is a discriminating point for sure. But do some agents do it anyhow, like just because that's their style?
Well, I think so, but I think those agents that do it, it may not be their style. It's like they think I need to compete with the bad guy. If the bad guy is doing a bunch of swearing, then I want to be liked, and so I want to swear along with him. And again, I'm not a choir boy. I'm not saying that I don't swear or anything.
Right.
It's just I'm thinking of the prosecution case. I had a couple cases where we targeted foreign government officials, and we knew those cases weren't going to trial. It was just a matter of gathering intelligence. So sort of the pressure was off that I could, kind of be me, say whatever I want, and not worry about trying to prepare an investigation for potential jury trial. So there it's a little bit different. And I'm sure you're going to find guests that you'll have guests on your show that say, you know what, Hamer doesn't know what he's talking about. Yeah. You've got to be one of them. And
it's absolutely. I mean, we all have the same job, but we all use different tools to get it done. I'm Mr. Likeable when I go out. I'm waving, I'm high, I got a big crowd around me, and that's when you see me working, you'll never know I'm working. You'll think I'm just goofing around, having fun. But but I'm fully working the whole time. A commander would never think so, but then he gets the report and he's like, I'll be damned. That guy was actually working the entire time he was out there.
Yeah. Well, it's obvious that you enjoy your work, and that's the way I was. I mean, I enjoyed the undercover work. I had some bad times. I had some bad meetings. I had some bad 6-month cases, but I enjoyed the work. And I loved being out in the field. I didn't want to be tethered to a desk. And for me, there was no greater excitement than pretending to be one of the bad guys and being believed by them.
Yeah. No, I can completely understand that. When I was talking with Jay, he talked a lot about managing the case as the undercover person. And what we think of as entrapment is totally different. And he was talking about, like, you can make a crime so enticing that a person would go beyond what they normally would do, which the jury decides that, right? And so when you go for entrapment, it's like, oh man, this is the easiest thing. We'll go in, we'll steal these jewels. I know the guy that'll sell them. All you got to do is come with me, and like all of a sudden that becomes entrapment because so you really are managing this case at that level. Another thing that I hadn't really thought about before was thinking like the jury as you do this.
Yeah, no. And Jay's absolutely right. I mean, part of the entrapment issue is that the defendant isn't predisposed to commit this crime. So a lot of times it's just a matter of you getting him to admit that he's done this before. So it's not entrapment. You're not putting words in the defendant's mouth, but what you're doing is you're getting him to explain his criminal history, and he explains it to you. And sometimes it comes back to bite him in the butt. I had a mob guy that used to brag when I asked him if he had quality cocaine. He used to brag about, I've been in the kitchens of Bogota. I've seen cocaine stacked clear up to the ceiling. Yeah, I know what good quality cocaine is. You don't even know what you're talking about. When he's coming back at me, you don't even know what good quality cocaine is, because I know what it is because I've been there. I've watched them prepare this in Bogota. Okay, let them run their mouth. Well, it turns out he'd never been to Bogota, but he's laying this whole thing out, and we're not charging him with traveling to Bogota, we're charging him with selling me cocaine. So when we play that tape and they try to raise entrapment, then the jury hears this tape. Well, now he's forced to take the stand to say, no, I've never been to Bogota. I was lying to the agent. And Pete, one of the greatest lines from his defense counsel was, I can guarantee you that if my client had known that Special Agent Heyman was an undercover FBI agent, he would have never made these claims. And it's like we sort of looked at each other, the judge looked at him, and people laughed. And it's like, and the judge even said, I will take that as true, that if your client knew this guy was an undercover cop, he would have never said those things.
How were the mob guys? I mean, because all we know is stuff from the movies, and there's no way that's an accurate portrayal across the board. So how would you describe how they lived, how they ran their business?
Hey, this is Pete A. Turner from Lions Rock Productions. We create podcasts around here, and if you, your brand, or your company want to figure out how to do a podcast, just talk to me. I'll give you the advice on the right gear, the best plan, and show you how to take a podcast that makes sense for you, that's sustainable, that's scalable, and fun. Hit me up at pete@breakitdownshow.com. Let me help. I want to hear about it.
How would you describe how they lived, how they ran their business?
I loved them. In fact, if I could go back and relive any undercover investigation, it would be that. I mean, they were just the guys that I had dealt with were just characters. I mean, they were storybook characters. I think one of the funniest lines, we had a guy, and your audience knows this, but in order to join the La Cosa Nostra, the Italian mafia, to become a member, for the most part, you have to kill somebody. You have to make your bones.
Right.
It's the terminology that they use. So one guy was an older man, probably my age now when I stopped to think about it, but he seemed a heck of a lot older when I was dealing with him. And we were talking, and I said, you made your bones. You made your bones back in New York. I said, so did you have to kill somebody? And he had the guttural voice, just like you would see in the movies. Yeah. Because just as a background, a lot of those guys, when they lived in the poor neighborhoods, it was the barbers that would take out the inflamed tonsils. So when they'd go down, they'd nick the vocal cord. So that's why several of the mob guys would always have that deep guttural voice. And he goes, Bobby, is there a statute of limitations on murder? And I said, I don't know. I'm not a lawyer. I really am a lawyer, but I said, I'm not a lawyer. And he goes, next question. And there was, Pete, I had another situation where I boxed, and I was a decent boxer. I wasn't professional, but I used to work out at a gym where a lot of professional boxers worked out, guys that fought for the world title. And I would be their sparring partners. I jump into the ring. I never won, but I learned how to take a punch. And so I used to watch boxing, and this was a long time ago. I recognize that, but I would watch the boxing on ESPN. And one night I was watching the fights, and the next day I'm in a motel room meeting with a mob guy, and he's got ESPN on, and it's the fights from the night before. And he thinks he knows everything about boxing, and he's telling me, he said, man, that kid's good. He knows what he's doing. I like him a lot. And I said, Mike, I don't know about you, but look at the back of his neck. It's getting all red. He's holding his hands too high. I mean, he's too tense. I bet he doesn't make it to the next round. Well, I had known that he got knocked out the next round, and we're just sitting there watching it, and kid gets knocked out in the next round. And I look like a genius only because he didn't realize this was a replay. But it was just, they were just characters. And I didn't find that in some of my cases. They were funny.
They were funny. Yeah, it's interesting when you meet all of these people, because it does seem like folks that do really dangerous things probably self-select in for a couple of reasons and then rise up because, of the kind of character you have to be to do these things. Just by force of will and force of personality, you're able to, if you survive, you move up, and all of a sudden you're talking to Bobby, the guy who's probably not a lawyer, because you just, that's the kind of people that get to that point.
Yeah, no, it's true. I sometimes laugh. One of my favorite courses in college was a class called Deviant Behavior. And I said that throughout my 26 years in the FBI and 4 years in the Marine Corps, I either met everyone that I studied in that course or I became everyone that I studied in that course. And so I enjoyed the different person. Again, I'm not bashing on the Bureau or anything, but
sure.
I didn't go to the local watering hole after work. I didn't hang out with FBI agents. I went home to my family. My family was my tether to the real world. But I enjoyed meeting people that were different, that came at life from a different angle. And I think, Jay's going to tell you this, and everybody, and this from your own experience, and you've already sort of demonstrated that in our conversation. But
you can't hear me. All right, let's work on that. Let's see here. Audio, I'm good. You should be able to hear me. Let's try this again. All right, so while Bob works on getting back in, hey everybody, this is Pete A. Turner from the Breakdown Show. We will be back momentarily with Bob. Hopefully he'll pop in a second here. I guess I will tell you a combat story while we're here. We're talking about undercover stuff. So we used to go out every day in Bosnia, and we would look for people to meet. And so what we would do is go to this place, go to that place, or whatever. And you don't know everybody's names, so you start to give people names. It's just a way of like keeping track of who's who, because it's just really hard. And we had this guy we called Bobby D because he looked like Robert De Niro, and he had liquor and he had pork. He had a little kiosk store, and so we would go hang out with Bobby D, and because other people came there. But it was great because here's this guy from Bosnia. He looked like Robert De Niro, and so that became his name. And then we started saying, hey, let's go to Bobby D's on the way home. So we might be out doing source operations all day or interviewing people, whatever it was that we were doing. And then we would like, hey, we'd be tired, but like, since we're going to go buy Bobby D's, let's pop in for a beer and just check in and just, continue to be normal people. Because they loved us. We were a lot of fun. We didn't really work the room too hard, but they always had someone new to meet. And it was like this really incredible meeting place. So we would go to Bobby D's and meet, whoever the guy was, Bozo Dorkovich or whatever the guy's name was. And it's just an interesting way to get to know folks in your region was by going out and having a beer, just like at home. So when I tell you, like, a lot of the times the things we do, it looks like we're just having fun. It's true. We're just having fun trying to meet people and get to know folks in the most normal sense. Let me send a text to Bob real quick here. Okay. Give Bob another minute or two here. Other way, it's been a great conversation with him, and I want to encourage you guys to go to Amazon. Here's the link right here. By the way, these links help Bob help me because we have an affiliate agreement with Amazon, and when you buy a book through our link, we get paid a little bit of money for that. And also, yes, when you buy Bob's book, you should always rate and review. Looks like we got Bob back. Let's see if we can hear each other. Bob, can you hear me?
Hi.
Yes. All right.
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
I apologize.
It's all right. It's all right. It's live. And I was vamping. And it turns out I got plenty of stories.
Okay. Well, when you're old and not technically sound, sometimes all this modern equipment can cause you issues.
And you're a Marine.
Yeah. Well, that's.
Hey, so you were saying
that's a different issue.
You were saying,
yeah. What were we talking about?
An action that Jay and you and I had displayed, And then you were like, but, and then that's when we lost.
Oh, yeah. No, I know what I was going to say is that, most cops, most people see the world black and white, and we have to see the gray. And you've done that. You've befriended terrorists.
Yeah.
Because you needed to do that. The typical serviceman or woman is going to hate that terrorist, and just like the bad guys, they can smell fear. They can smell hatred.
Yeah.
So what I found, the only way I could be successful was to latch on to that good quality of the person. And then I could continue to work with that person. As a good example, Pete, I infiltrated a group called NAMBLA, the North American Man-Boy Love Association.
Whoa.
These were a bunch of adults who were sexually attracted to boys. Now, there's probably nothing that makes me angrier than to see child abuse and to watch, to learn of children that have been sexually abused. So it was very difficult for me emotionally and spiritually to go into this group. And they would have sensed how much I hated what they stood for. But I had to become one of them in order to be successful in this investigation.
Boy, yeah.
So I had to find, okay, really he's funny. He may be a child abuser, but he's funny, or this guy's personable, or any quality that you can find to latch onto. That's what you have to do, and just keep in mind the ultimate goal is to get these guys convicted and get them off the street.
Yeah, I totally agree. I talk a lot about the situational ethics, like an ethical well that you have. Like you can only do so many ethical things. Like if you try to do everything ethically, it doesn't work. Like everything gets flipped around and crazy. And I guess I should describe what I'm talking about. But there was this news story for a while talking about how military units were coming across men that were abusing boys in Afghanistan. And look, we've got to go out and walk in these valleys and deal with these people. So we're not there to save every boy that's being abused. It sounds horrible as I'm saying the words out loud, but we've got to keep a platoon alive. And our little outpost is tiny and there ain't no help coming. Like we amass enough enemies that we make them into active enemies. We're fucked. So things like that are just, not that they're not a priority, but we have no bandwidth for those kind of issues. And so in terms of like the ethics that you have to put out there, yeah, you have to talk to people that are terrorists, that do terrible things, because you can't stop the terrible things unless you become friends with these folks. And you're right. You have to find ways to work through that. And also to the other end, if you're out selling gas on the black market, gray market, whatever you want to call it, I have to let them, I don't care about that. And tell the commander, like, we don't care about that. There's bigger fish to fry here. These people are extra legal. Yes, they shouldn't be doing what they're doing, but ultimately we don't need to mess with it, because the Army loves to latch on to like, let's go get these guys. Like, no. Let me handle this. This guy's not important. Let's get to somebody bigger.
No, an excellent point. And you see that so many times in our successful prosecutions. I mean, John Gotti, probably the most important mob guy in the last couple decades that you hear about, probably would have never been convicted had not his number two man, Sammy the Bull, gone against him. So you find, particularly in law enforcement, you got to go to bed sometimes with some pretty bad people if you expect to get, if you have a larger target or an ultimate goal. And that's what, you've got that with plea bargaining, you've got that with cooperation agreements, with cooperating witnesses. Just as I said earlier, many of my informants, the people that introduced me to other drug dealers, they were working off of beef. They had been caught committing a crime, and now they've agreed to cooperate for a lesser punishment by introducing an undercover agent. So if you take the position, hey, you violate the law, you go to jail, then you take that position. But you're probably not going to get the bigger fish if you aren't willing to make or allow the cooperation by these smaller fish to go after the bigger people.
I wanted to take this last little segment of the show and talk about your writing, because as fascinating as the undercover world is, and I'm glad to talk to you about that, on another show some more, because it is like having you and Jay on would be a neat show. But let's talk about writing. Like, when did you discover, like, hey, I need to do this? And then you keep doing it, so you must be enjoying it and getting better success from it too.
Yeah, I had a lot of defense counsel say that I was a great fiction writer, but they were usually referring to my affidavits.
Right.
No, I never took creative writing in college or anything. I never had any aspirations to be a writer, but one of my final cases was this infiltration of Nambla. Toward the end of my career, I was working 3 undercover cases at the same time, and of the 3, actually of all my undercover cases, the most despicable was infiltrating Nambla. And I kind of wanted to talk about that, not to brag that I was an undercover agent, but to expose the boy lover agenda and to expose this organization called NAMBLA, the North American Man Boy Love Association. I happened to run into an agent, a literary agent, at a Christmas party, and was talking about it and said, I was thinking about writing a book. And he said, yeah, why don't you? And we can probably get it sold. So that's how it began with that first book. Then a publisher came to me and said, have you written any fiction? So I wrote a little bit of fiction. I don't like to write. I
love it.
I don't. I don't know if you're familiar with Jerry Jenkins. He wrote the Left Behind series. I mean, he sold millions of books.
Yeah.
And I happened to talk to him one day, and he said something that really resonated with me. He said, I don't like to write. I like to rewrite. And that's kind of the way I am. I like to get it down on paper and now go back.
Okay.
And when I'm writing, I'm slow. I'm a slow thinker. I'm a slow typist. But when I'm writing, I'll try to write 1,000 words a day.
Okay.
And I get to the point, I look down at the left-hand corner of the screen, and it says I'm at 397 words. So the next sentence is, it was a very, 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 very hot day.
Yes.
And now I've hit my 1,000 words and I'm out of here.
Yeah.
But what happened, Pete, is that when my first book came out, I was really fortunate. I live in Southern California. And so I started going down to the Naval Hospital at Balboa and visiting the combat wounded, the guys that had just come back from Iraq and Afghanistan. And I'm meeting guys that are double and triple amputees. So I would take the book in, and essentially it was, hey, I'm Bob Hamer, former Marine, retired FBI agent. I can't sing or dance, but here's a book. And I would go into the room. Maybe I'd stay 2 minutes, maybe I'd stay 2 or 3 hours.
Right.
And develop some real strong friendships with these guys that I still have. And at one point, a couple of the wives came to me and said, could you help us write our story? And what I saw, and I'm sure I think you will agree with this. The guys that were out there running and gunning, they knew what they were getting into. They knew what they signed up for, but these wives didn't.
Yeah.
And when they become the single mom for a deployment, when their husbands come back with missing limbs, and they didn't sign up for a husband that only had one arm, that doesn't have any legs or doesn't have an arm. That's not what they signed up for. But they stood by their men. And I was so impressed by their stories that I actually was fortunate enough to get hooked up with Oliver North. And my favorite book of all the books is Oliver North's book, American Heroes on the Homefront, because these are the stories, most of them are stories of the men and women that I met down at Balboa Hospital and was able to tell their stories.
Yeah, there's a lot of incredible stories out there. When people thank me for my service, I think, my daughter didn't have a choice. She barely had a dad. I came back and I've had to deal with a lot. It's not been an easy. My daughter and I get on great, but we didn't get to have a real relationship. We have the semblance of one, and I love the hell out of my daughter and she loves me, but that's a sacrifice from the battlefield that no one talks about. And she gets to bear that for the rest of her life. It's hard.
No. And I think it's very true. Unless you've been there in some capacity, you don't appreciate the cost and the sacrifice that the servicemen and women have made, that their families have made, the impact that this has had on their children. It's tough. When our son was deployed, in the Bible, it talks about praying unceasingly. And I never understood what that meant until my son was in Afghanistan. And it was like every living thought was a prayer asking to keep him safe. And the burdens of these families that have suffered through 3, 4, 5 deployments. And then the husband comes back or the wife comes back. And now it's like society expects them to live a normal life and that none of this has impacted them. And it's not easy.
Yeah, it's not. Hey, Mary Roten is a great supporter of the show, asked a question. It goes back in time a little bit, but what would you have done if the boys were being abused in front of you and they offer you one? And how does that stuff affect your cover?
You know what? That's a great question, Mary. That was certainly the issue that the Bureau raised when I did this. I did not confront this. I wasn't faced with it. And I actually told the Bureau, I said, if they abuse a boy in front of me, I kill him. And that's how we resolve that problem. The organization as such, I was never alone with anyone in the group when they had boys with them. We had set up a sting operation where they were going to join me to go down to Mexico to abuse boys. Just to kind of, Mary, to somewhat answer your question too, what made this case difficult was I had to get them to admit exactly the purpose of the trip and what they wanted from the boys, because we couldn't have them saying, oh, good, we're going to go to Mexico. I'll come with you. Because then if we arrested them, they would just say, well, I was just going to Mexico because it was cold in Chicago.
Right.
So we came up with, and I just made it up, but we had a BB&B, a bed, breakfast, and boys.
Oh, boy.
And so I need to know what age you want and what sexual favors you want from the boys, because some of them won't do everything that you want. Right. So we'll actually hook you up. And it turned out that of the 8 members of the inner circle, 7 members of the inner circle that agreed to go on the trip, they all wanted anywhere between, I think 10 and 13-year-old boy, and they all wanted anal sex. And we got them to admit that prior to taking them down there. So
yeah. Yeah, by the way, you also have been on Craig Sawman Sawyer's show, another guy from Tucson, so we share a lot of connections. I want to go back. What's your most current book that's out? Is there another one in the works?
Well, let's see, my most current book. The last 3 books I wrote for other people. So I wrote 2 books for Oliver North, and then I wrote a book for a guy named Tim Lee, a great guy. He was a Marine who lost both legs in Afghanistan, and now he's an evangelist. So I wrote his memoir. I helped him write his memoir, and it's called Born on the 5th of July. I've written a couple novellas that are available as ebooks. It's in the Josh Stewart series, and I've actually been in talks with a pretty big name producer, that he's read the novellas and he likes them, and he wants to talk about maybe making those into a series of some sort. So we'll see if that happens. And I've just finished the first draft of a book, and again, it's a Marine who lost his arm in Afghanistan is now on the Paralympic snowboarding team. So we've completed that first draft, and now kind of waiting back for his corrections to the memoir and all that. So it's a little easier for me to write someone else's story. And Pete, I hate the marketing. I told you it up front, I'm not a talking head. I don't want to talk about current events because I'm not privy to them. I wasn't in the White House when they discussed this issue. I wasn't there when these FBI agents were planning. I don't know all the evidence that they have or don't have.
Yeah.
And just to kind of opine that, well, they should have done it this way. Well, I don't know. Maybe they shouldn't have done it that way because I wasn't there. So the marketing has not been my favorite aspect of writing.
Yeah. One of the things that we've discovered along the way from talking to hundreds of you and your peers is that the book selling business is no shit. It's a business, and you have to be salesman of the year at your business every year that you're out there. And you're right. It's, you're fortunate to have broken out to have an audience and everything, but book tours and signings and social media these are all norms of the business. It's a lot of work.
I went into it pretty naively. Seriously, I scored a 0 on a CIA personality test. I just assumed that I'd sit in the office and write a book and send it to the publisher, and then they'd put it in Barnes and Noble and Books A Million, and then they'd start sending me royalty checks. Yeah. And it didn't come down to that. Nope. And it came down to, okay, now what are you going to do to market this book? Yep. And we can get you on this radio show, but they need you right now because there's been a bank robbery in Baltimore and the FBI SWAT is on the scene and they want you to talk about it. And they'll say that you're the author of this particular book. And it's like, okay, well, I was never on SWAT and I never worked bank robberies. So what exactly do you want me to say? I just didn't like doing that. Sure. And that's why I appreciate you having me on the show. I really do. But to talk about cases and to sort of chat, you and I back and forth talking about our lives rather than, well, this is what's going on with society today. And this is how we need to correct it. And if I were in charge, this is what I'd be doing. So.
Yeah. I'd rather talk about, I was sitting there in this bar and this guy said, we're doing shots. And I know my answer is yes, and the lieutenant who's terrified to drink in front of me, like, and I'll take his shots too, that's what I'd rather talk about because that's what our job came down to. We stayed alive because we could make friends with people, and whether it was through shots or handshakes or stories. I appreciate what you've done and everything and how challenging it is to do it. And by the way, stay alive. Hey, how often does an agent have a bad outcome, whether, from like they no longer can medically work to the end? How often does that happen?
Well, just in terms of undercover work, a lot of guys just self-select. I mean, they do a couple of assignments and then they don't want to do it anymore. There were a few of us that sought out the undercover assignments and specifically looked for those and tried to do the undercover work. But a lot of guys, and I'm sure Jay will confirm this too. I mean, a lot of great ATF agents, a lot of great FBI agents and DEA agents, a lot of great cops never worked undercover. That wasn't their forte. They didn't have an interest in doing it. Yep. But there were some of us that just gravitated toward it. And that's what we wanted to do. Just like guys that gravitate toward homicides or that gravitate towards SWAT or, in the military, you've got great intel agents. You've got great infantry officers. You got great pilots, and they never want to do any of the others. And so that's kind of the way for me. I was fortunate. Quickly in my career, I found the undercover work, and I was successful at it, and I kept doing it.
Yeah, I completely agree. In the intel world, you've got analysts, folks who plan operations and operators. And you can be strong in two, but you're not strong in all three. Like I can analyze things, but I'm not an analyst, and I don't want to be. I don't want to be behind a desk, and you want me to be out front, you know. And as everybody kind of sorts themselves out, you know, the Army kind of does itself a disservice by promoting people out of spots where they're good. I got to stay on the ground and just continue to get better and better at working, and yeah, you'd see people who had no business being in the field. They were excited about it, but then you'd read what they came back with, and you're like, yeah, you missed all of these things here. And they have no idea, you know. But then they realized, and like, I need to go plan. I need to go analyze. I need to go do something else, because that world that we were able to survive in, it's not for everybody.
No. And that's why I was really fortunate in the FBI, because unlike the military, where they just keep promoting you, in the FBI, you can remain a street agent your entire career, and which is what I did. I had no desire to go in the administrative route and to sit behind a desk and order others to do this or tell them how to work their cases. I mean, I laugh. I was a lance corporal my entire 26 years in the FBI. I never supervised anybody, and quite frankly, I didn't take supervision very well.
Oh, so, boy, yeah.
I enjoyed essentially being on that high wire alone without a net, and that's where I thrived.
That is a conversation that we need to have with you, me, Jay, and maybe somebody else, because you're right. I was an absolute wild horse. I would pull my cart faster and further, better than anybody else, but don't you dare try to put another cart on me, because I wasn't going to, you know, we're not built for that. We're built to, I know what to do. I know how to get it. If you can't support me, then get the fuck away from me. I'm doing this myself, you know? All right, well, listen, I've had you for an hour. It's been awesome. I really appreciate it. It's just been great.
Thanks so much for having me, Pete. I appreciate it. Let's do it again.
Yeah, this is Bob Hamer, everybody. All right, thanks a lot.